All right, we are recording. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this radcast of the Solution Club at the beginning of the new world. And today we are going to go over an introduction to what radical collective intelligence is, to what the big idea is, and then we're going to talk about how we plan to launch radical collective intelligence at a planetary scale through a series of block parties. And I want to give folks an opportunity to introduce themselves if they feel like it, either now or at any time, maybe when you first have something to say. Just feel free to say hello and introduce yourself. So I'm going to just pause for a moment. If anyone wants to introduce themselves at this time, no pressure. Never any pressure to speak on the Solution Club, by the way. Never, ever any pressure to speak. It's totally fine to just hang out and just listen and say, hey, I'm here to listen and take it all in. All right. All right. So let's just make this an open conversation. Feel free to jump in anytime, anyone. And we generally mute our microphones when we're not talking so we don't have feedback. So thanks everyone for muting. So let's first talk about kind of the big motivation behind radical collective intelligence and the block parties. The motivation is that life on Earth is in the process of a great dying, a great mass extinction. We're in the middle of in the early stages of the sixth mass extinction, which is projected to accelerate as the planet continues to overheat, as we lose the last remaining ice. And when we lose the last remaining ice, we lose the last remaining reflectivity, reflecting the bright sunlight back into space. So this ice acts as a big mirror. But we're losing the mirror. We're melting away our mirrors, which are keeping us cool. And so the problems that we're facing here on the Earth are many, many problems. There are many that are human problems, others that are environmental. I mentioned planetary overheating a lot because it's both the single biggest problem that we're facing, and it's also the single biggest driver of the rest of the problems. Think famine, drought, disease, right? Think extreme weather events. It's flooding now in Spain. We've had severe droughts and then wildfires in Australia. Greenland caught on fire a couple years ago for the first time ever. Greenland's not ever supposed to catch on fire. So this is just evidence of the extent of the massive overheating that we're experiencing, which is slowly but surely cooking us all to death. So, but again, we've got myriad problems of myriad different kinds: overpopulation, violence, nationalism leading to national struggles, international conflicts, wars over resources, etc. And we also have a system of governance and politics that seems not very conducive to healthy transformation. It seems to want to hold things in place and keep wealth and power concentrated in the hands of the few people who hold it today. And those people, in turn, seem quite deluded as to the nature of our predicament and our ability to do anything about it. Donald Trump is one kind of extreme example of that, but he's just an example of a general delusion that things can just continue as they are. And in fact, they should continue as they are, right? And the reason I believe a lot of those folks are deluded in that regard is that things are going well for them. They're surrounded by wealth and property and privilege and money. And I think they get so deluded in that state of extreme privilege that they simply can't imagine it going away. And so anyway, that's just some really brief thoughts. And I encourage everyone to jump in. That's one of the advantages of having a small group, is that we can jump in at any time. So feel free to jump in with your own thoughts. But the general picture that I'm painting is one where humanity as a whole, whether rich or poor and whatever country you live in, we are all in varying degrees trapped in a system which is in the process of destroying life on Earth at a crazy accelerating rate. And we may not have much time left to turn the ship around in terms of stopping the planetary overheating. And actually, I want to go way beyond stopping the overheating. I want to actually cool the planet. And we have the technology and tools to do that. What we don't have is the collective intelligence as a species to figure out how to do that. And that's what we'll get to the heart of with radical collective intelligence. So, so what is radical collective intelligence? What is this kind of silver bullet mega solution that I'm proposing and suggesting? So I'm going to describe it in, at first, sort of kind of mechanistic terms of this is how it works. And I'll ask you to please interject with any questions you have along the way, and also any comments. That really makes for a healthy flow for the whole conversation. So mechanistically, okay, and I'm going to ask everyone to put on their big imagination caps, and I'm going to paint a picture of radical collective intelligence full-blown in the future, right? And then after I've painted that big full-blown picture of radical collective intelligence, then I'll go back and I'll start where we are right now, and I'll say, how do we get from here to that big whoosh, full-blown picture? So full-blown picture of radical collective intelligence. Imagine, put on your biggest imagination cap you've got. For me, it's this headband. Okay, imagine that there are literally 1 million video conferences happening in parallel, just like this one, 1 million. And those 1 million video conferences are on 1 million different topics or mashups between topics. Okay? And likewise, imagine that just like we're recording this video conference, that all those other video conferences are being recorded. And imagine that in parallel with recording the video conferences, we're also broadcasting them. We're not broadcasting this one, but it's actually very easy to do. We could be broadcasting. In fact, some would say we should be broadcasting, but we'll get to that later. Just imagine that all 1 million video conferences are being recorded, broadcast, and transcribed. Everything that's being said is being transcribed into text in real time. And imagine further that all these 1 million transcripts that are constantly being generated by the words that we're using, that these transcripts are in real time indexed by the big search engines. Let's just take Google, for example, the biggest. Google is constantly indexing any new content that comes out on the web, so it's no great stretch to imagine Google in real time indexing the transcripts from all 1 million of these conversations. And we also have automated translation from one language to the next. So imagine that every conversation of the 1 million conversations, regardless of what language it's happening in, it's constantly the transcripts of these conversations are constantly being translated to all languages. So anyone in any language can read any transcript of any conversation in their native language. Okay. Now, furthermore, imagine that all of this data, all of these transcripts in all these different languages are made publicly accessible, and you can search through the whole corpus of transcripts of all million conversations and just say, all right, well, who's talking about floating mirrors in oceans for SRM, right? So that's a very specific topic that's very near and dear to my heart, solar radiation management, or SRM, through the use of floating mirrors, vast arrays of floating mirrors in the oceans, which is a concept we'll talk about in a little bit. But this way I'd be able to search floating mirrors, oceans, SRM, and find all the conversations that are using those words or that combination of words, not necessarily in that order, but you know, that combination of words. You know how Google search works. So, and the big idea there is that anyone, anywhere in the world can search for those conversations that are talking about the things that they care about, that they want to be talking about, right? And they can find them. And if the conversation is open for anyone to join, like this conversation right here that we're having right now, this Solution Club, this is totally open. I've posted the link on Facebook. I've emailed it to over 100 people. Feel free to forward it on. Anyone who has the link can click on it and voila, you'll be here. Okay. So now imagine these million conversations happening in parallel. Imagine them, I sometimes make the analogy of a million lane freeway, right? So here this 10 fingers, 10 lanes. Imagine a million lanes, right? A million lane freeway. And in each lane, you have a different video conference happening, generating this transcript. And imagine everyone's moving forward in time at about 1 mile an hour in their lane, right? So just imagine a really slow walk, right? So you have these million, imagine in each lane there's a van, and there's, you know, in this case, there's what, 5 people plus Diamond in our van, right? Having this conversation, generating this transcript. Well, imagine there's a million vans, and we're all moving forward in parallel, pooping out this transcript of text behind each van, right? That is indexed and made searchable, etc. And so imagine, even if you're sitting in one van having a conversation, you're like, well, you know, this is cool, but really I'm interested in dot, 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 and that person searches for what they're really the most interested in, and they find out there's another van in a different lane having a conversation that they'd be really psyched to join, and it's open. All they have to do is click on a link and voila, they get teleported from one van to another van. We call that a lane change. It's an individual changing lanes, not the entire van, but an individual changing lanes, okay? From one van to another, from one conversation to another. So imagine a world in which you have, at any given time, many millions of people either participating in a conversation like we're doing right now, or just watching. You know, the conversation's being broadcast and they're just watching and listening. They're not participating yet. They're not adding to the conversation. They're just consuming the conversation. Nothing wrong with that. And suppose that while they're watching, they have an idea, but they don't want to be on video themselves. Maybe they're in their pajamas eating Fruit Loops or something, but they do have an idea that they'd like to contribute, so they type in a text message. They type it in, hit submit, and just like we've got a text window down here, I'm going to see if you can see this, Carol. Hello, Carol. Okay, I don't know if you can see that on your phone. Okay, great. All right. So people will be able to type in text messages if they're watching, and then the participants can see the text messages that other people type. So there's different ways of interacting, right? The most full-blown way of interacting is jumping in and being in the video conference. You can see everybody and everybody can hear you. But there are other ways like text, chat. And so the big idea is basically millions of people participating in a million different conversations and being able to change conversations at will. And then if you imagine this set of million conversations spanning every facet, right? Here, somebody just changed lanes and joined our conversation. Evan. Well, I see Evan trying to jump in. I think he's on public transport or something right now. Welcome, Evan, if you can hear us, we're recording. And so imagine these million conversations spanning every relevant facet of carbon emissions and carbon sequestration, methane emissions and methane sequestration, solar radiation management, cooling the planet through reflectivity, refreezing Arctic ice and glaciers that are melting, protecting them, etc. And then imagine there are other conversations that are talking about the politics of climate change, the politics of reducing emissions, right? The politics of sequestration, the politics of solar radiation management. How would we get governments to support that, etc. And then imagine there are other conversations happening about economics and economic forces and incentives like carbon tax, laws, regulations, policies, etc. There's Evan. Evan! Just trying to say hello to Evan there. All right, welcome, Evan. Are you on the ferry? I guess Evan's on the ferry.
Looks like it.
Yeah, Evan's on the ferry heading over here. All right, anyway, we're recording now, Evan. So then, you know, the big picture, and Melissa, if you can walk in front of the screen, that would help. I just want to make sure, is it like a general freeze that's going on? Or is it just specific tests? Maybe we should move that.
Oh, Melissa's.
Okay. All right, so it's just Evan and Carol who are frozen. So, okay, good to know we can see you, sweetheart. Thank you. Anyway, so imagine these million conversations spanning all the relevant aspects and facets and parts of the global economic, political, and cultural systems that are, number one, keeping our current economy rolling and the current machinery of destruction of life on Earth advancing as it is, and also that we span every facet of the solutions that we need, including what is getting in the way of those solutions from happening. What's keeping us from doing solar radiation management and cooling the planet right now, right? Well, there's a lot of things in the way. I'd say the biggest thing that's in the way is the fact that we humans have not yet figured out how to come together and actually manifest these million conversations happening in parallel. Because when we do figure out how to come together and have a million conversations in parallel spanning all facets of this, and then you have essentially like ambassadors popping from one conversation to the next, sort of weaving it all together and saying, look, over there in the engineering conversations, we've got the engineering solutions to solar radiation management. We've got that figured out. What's missing is the politics. How do we get the governments in the world to A, support this, and B, get on the presidential podium and do a press conference and say, hello, Americans, and hello, world. We've got this urgent need to cool the planet through solar radiation management, and here's how we're doing it. We can come up with all these solutions. And the key to coming up with all these solutions is coming together like we're doing right now in conversation. But doing it a million times over, doing it at scale, right? There's 7.6 billion or whatever people on the planet. If 1 in 1,000 of us join together in conversation like what we're doing right now, that would be 7.6 million people. And if on average there were 7.6 people per conversation, there you have 1 million conversations. So I maintain that the single biggest thing stopping us from co-creating all the solutions that we need is that we don't yet have the idea, the culture, the platform to all come together. Not all of us, but even 1 in 1,000 of us. Can you imagine 1 million conversations happening in parallel about every single relevant facet to climate change, planetary overheating, planetary cooling, what we need to do, engineering solutions, political solutions, financial solutions, cultural solutions, media solutions, social media solutions, right? To basically put the word out that humanity, we are on a mission to cool the planet. This is what needs to happen, and this is what you can do. Imagine there were 7.5 million really active humans on the case saying, this is what we need to do, and we're working on all aspects of it, and join us. Join the conversations. So that instead of 7.6 million of us, there will be 76 million of us. That's when we have 1 in 100 humans working on this. Can you imagine 76 million people spanning maybe 5 million different conversations or 10 million different conversations, right? And really getting down to the fine-grained nitty-gritty of every aspect of this and exactly what needs to happen so that we can cool the planet in time. Okay, this is really exciting stuff. Now, at this point, let me pause and suggest, I'm going to bring the laptop over here. The iPad. We got a little hotspot here just to make sure that we have maximum bandwidth. Okay, hopefully. All right. So, I first want to make a general statement, and Evan says he'll be back in a minute. The general statement is this. Just consider that the biggest threat to life on Earth is the belief that someone else will fix it. Let me repeat that. Consider that the biggest threat to life on Earth